So my name is Rohini Ross, and I live in Topanga, California, with my husband Angus Ross, our two daughters, Kesha and Ashana Ross, and our lovely husky, and a fairly new addition to our family, our cat Aurora. One of the things that I love about living here is the sunshine. I'm definitely someone who enjoys having that as part of my life. And then where we live in Topanga, there's beautiful hiking spots, and so that's something that I spend a lot of time doing, is being outdoors with Nico and with Angus sometimes. And that's one of my happy places. So when Angus and I met, it was pretty early on that he let me know that he'd been diagnosed with MS. And he had the experience where, I think this was before I met him, where half of his body went numb. He had pins and needles in his leg, and he was playing volleyball on the weekends, and he started to notice that he was falling over, and it was just, something was not right. I think he was really expecting that that would mean that I wouldn't want to be in relationship with him, that I wouldn't want to pursue that, and I certainly wouldn't want to marry him. Like, I think he felt that he was not eligible to be married because of this diagnosis that could potentially end up with him dying from it or being disabled from it. And I think I was probably influenced by my upbringing, where my mother married my stepfather. And then shortly after that, he was diagnosed with stage 4 Hodgkin's disease. And so for most of their relationship, he was ill. And he did end up dying from Hodgkin's disease after about 5 years after the diagnosis. But it never occurred to me that you wouldn't love someone or marry someone because they were sick or they weren't feeling like that. Just wasn't on my mind. It just didn't make any sense. So Angus told me later that he was kind of shocked, but he didn't say anything at the time, but he was shocked by that it wasn't really something that was on my mind. And I also think that he was absolutely fine, and I didn't know what was going to happen in the future. And I trusted that I would be able to handle whatever showed up in our life, that would be just something that we handled as and when it was needed to be handled, and that I didn't need to be thinking about it ahead of time. And so I think that was really helpful too. And so it was kind of a non-issue for a long period of time. There was sort of no manifestations of the illness. And then we moved to the US shortly after we were married. And I think that there was perhaps more stress, or who knows what the factors were, but Angus started to have episodes where it moved beyond just the tingling. He would sort of lose the ability to use a part of his body. It would affect his nerves in that way. And with all of my good intentions of sort of not having this be something that would have me not want to be in relationship with him, where I would still get really caught up is that when he was having one of these episodes, I would get anxious. And the ways that I would try to control my anxiety were to try and tell him what to do, to try and control him. Like, I would have all kinds of suggestions that I thought he should be doing, doctors or, things. And so it's not so much that it was the suggestions that were, not appreciated. I think it was more the feeling behind where it would come from in making them. And so it wasn't this warm, open-hearted, loving feeling about, well, Angus, what about this? It was like, you should do this. And like, why aren't you doing that? Like, it was critical. He felt it as critical. And I guess it was critical. And I wasn't intentionally meaning to be critical. I wasn't intentionally meaning to be controlling. But I can see now, looking back, how my fear was what was really driving a lot of those kinds of suggestions. And, Angus followed a lot of them. Like, he went to see a doctor here and was told that he should go on a certain treatment with steroids, and we had good health insurance at the time, but it was still going to be really, really expensive to pay for the medication. And so he just decided that he wasn't going to do it, that was, he wasn't wanting to spend that much money on it, and he didn't really trust what the results were going to be. And so there was a lot of unknown around this, and a lot of gratitude when the episode would pass and he would feel better, and then but the not knowing of when the next episode is going to happen. And I remember the most extreme one that he experienced, where he lost the use of his left arm and he was carrying it in a sling. And we had I don't know if it started before we left on a trip. We were driving to Canada to visit my family, and I think it might have started on the way, and then it just got progressively worse and worse. And he started to lose the full use of his arm. And so because he couldn't use his arm, I was the one that was driving. We were on a road trip. And so we ended the trip early. And, it's really humbling to admit, but I was not kind to him on the way home. Like, I was just, I was angry. And of course, this isn't his fault. I can't blame him, but a part of me was blaming him. I don't even know how to make sense of it now, but it was just, I was angry. I wasn't compassionate. I was critical. I was short with him. And again, now I see that was how my fear was manifesting. I was feeling out of control. I was feeling scared. And the person who deserved it the least was the recipient of those emotions. And it wasn't, obviously it wasn't my choice. And I couldn't get a grip on it. Like, I just couldn't find a way to stabilize myself. And this was before I came across the principles understanding. Not that that's an excuse, but I didn't have a lot of understanding about what was going on at the time. And I was very reactive. And I think it was really eye-opening when we talked about it years later, when I could understand more about Angus's experience and how I showed up. And I think I was blind to a lot of it. I didn't realize how critical I was being, how uncompassionate I was being with him. And it certainly wouldn't have been my intention, right? That's not my value system. So I went a little crazy. When I look back at myself, I didn't have much understanding about my own state of mind, my own suffering. I think it was so focused on him, and so had such an agenda to try and make things better for him, that I was so stirred up, I was making it worse for him. Right. The last thing he needed was for me to be unkind and critical and controlling and judgmental and, all whatever I was. And I'm hoping I wasn't that way 100% of the time, but it was enough for it to really impact him. And so what I see now is that because of my lack of awareness about my own state of mind and my over focus on him, I completely forgot about my self-care. I went into crisis mode. I was like, driving from Canada to LA, getting us there as quickly as possible so that we could get him to the doctor that we wanted to get him to. And I just was not in the equation. And now what I would do differently is that I would recognize that in order to show up for him in the way that I wanted to show up for him, that I needed to be in the equation, that my state of mind, my well-being had to be a priority, and it wasn't. And just factoring that in, I think, is what then has different ideas occur to you. Like, because I wasn't thinking about myself, I wasn't recognizing how poor my state of mind was. I was not really realizing how badly I was behaving. I was just not aware of any of that because I was so outwardly focused and so driven by my fear. I wasn't getting reflective, and I wasn't checking into what do I need, and how do I be with my feelings around this? Like, where's the room for my fear and my feeling of being out of control and not knowing what I'm going to do if I find myself having to take care of him because he's completely incapacitated. And so all of this, when he told me, it's like, I'm up for this, wherever it goes. But then the reality of that was hard. And it was not, I wasn't prepared for it in a way that I may have not thought I could handle it. And I think just having room for our human experience is so important. Like if I had been able to say to him, I'm angry, I'm pissed off, I can't, like just not at him, but just to share my experience, or maybe not with Angus, but with somebody else. Like if I had been able to give myself the space to be honest with myself about what was going on for me, I think that would have allowed me to show up in a different way for him. But the pressure that I was putting on myself to be a support ended up working against me, so that I wasn't really a good support for him. And that would be the last thing that I was hoping for. So the self-care piece, I think, is really crucial in general, whether we've got someone in our life who's struggling or not. I think that it's very easy. I'll speak for myself. My conditioning is to sort of take care of my safety and security by making sure those around me are okay. And that was something that I learned from early on in my life as a coping mechanism. And it can look very kind, like it can look very generous. But if you really look behind it, when it's coming from a coping mechanism of, I need to do this in order to be okay, it's not really altruistic. It's actually quite selfish. And I think that was the tizzy that I got myself into, is like with all of my caretaking in that moment with Angus, it didn't matter what I did, I wasn't feeling better. And I just got more and more sped up because it felt like I needed him to be better in order for me to be okay. Like that, it just looked that way. And when I couldn't make that happen, it had me spinning out of control. When people hear the word self-care, they often have these ideas about what it means. And they're often ideas that are like, I have to go and get a massage, or I have to go spend the day at the spa, or I have to spend a lot of money on what that means, self-care. And that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm really pointing to is the importance of including ourselves in the equation of what matters. And so what I've seen is that just by simply understanding that my well-being and my state of mind is important, and I would say of primary importance, like that's the top of my list, not because I'm selfish, but because it's what allows me to live life fully, and also what allows me to show up in the way that I want to show up in life more of the time, more often. And so what this understanding has really significantly helped me with is seeing that my peace of mind, my well-being, like that's not really a psychological experience. It's more of a spiritual experience. It's more of a space that I drop into within myself that is formless. And it's grace. Like, I don't know how I get there. It's not something that I can make happen. I'm grateful that I have the capacity to drop into that. And I think it is natural for all of us to drop into it, but it's not something that I have a technique that makes it happen. But I think respecting it and understanding that it's available does facilitate dropping into it more often. I don't know how it works. I can't explain that part of it. But understanding that that's available in that formless essence of who I am, that is the source of who we all are, that is the oneness from which we all are expressions of that in our beautiful, unique ways, to understand that that is who I am and that experience is available to me, independent of whatever life circumstance is going on. For me, that has been a huge game changer. And that, to me, is the ultimate of self-care, is to look in that direction and to be open to the inner resourcing that comes from that, the inner guidance that comes from that, and the ability to be with my human experience as a result of experientially knowing that state of mind. I find that I'm much more able to be with all of my feelings now in a way where I wasn't able to before, because I had so much judgment on myself of having to show up in a certain way. Like, I think that how I am now, if I were in that specific experience now, I would have a lot more room for my tears and my fear and my anger and my ability to just be with that experience so that I could be all of myself rather than trying to be this sort of narrow version of myself that showed up in a loving way, in a kind way. And the irony of that is that all of the pressure that I had on myself and all of the judgment that I had on myself that told me, like, this is what a good person is, or this is what a good Rohini is, I was living completely outside of those boundaries. And because I couldn't accept it, I couldn't see it. But I couldn't see myself. My conscience wasn't really kicking in because I was so blind to what I was doing. And again, it's not like I was screaming at Angus the whole time. It's like, it's, I don't want to paint myself to be completely crazy, but I just, I can see how that hurt him, after him sharing with me, and could see how that was not my intention. And I can now see, like, yeah, I couldn't even see what I was doing because I needed to be blind to it in that moment in order to cope, because I didn't have the understanding that allowed me to be human, that allowed me to have needs, that allowed me to have emotions, that was, there was so many emotions that were felt scary or wrong or too much. And anger was a big one of them. Yet I'm oozing anger in my criticism, in my judgmental nature, in my controlling nature, like it's oozing out of me because it wasn't love, but it was my own sort of waking up to those restrictions that gave me the freedom. And that happened in the timing that it happened, right? That's life unfolding. I'm grateful that it happened. I think this understanding has been really powerful in those shifts happening within me. But I can't judge the timing of it. Like, the timing of it is what it is. And that happened the way that it happened. And so I think that informs a lot of how I work with people now and what I see as helpful in terms of seeing my own ability to expand my capacity to love all of myself. And it can sound so like, oh, new agey or woo-woo self-love, but it's not like an action that I'm doing. It's an experience I'm having, right? I'm not doing self-love. I'm having the experience of seeing that all of me is okay, even the parts that I might have preferences that I don't have, right? But I can have the experience of seeing that that is all part of the expression of who I am. It isn't all of who I am, right? My behaviors, my thoughts, my feelings are part of the form of the expression of who I am, but who I am is who we all are, right? It's who we all are. And to know that and to feel that, or even have like a little taste of that. Angus and I were doing a webinar the other day, and we're saying it's so difficult to speak to this, like, who am I? We get a little a scent of it, like a little waft of it. And like that's what we get, and that's enough. And so I have like this waft of sense of this formless nature of who I am, within which all of this other expression takes place. And there can be room for all of that. Even Rohini the bitch, right? Even Rohini who's controlling, and all of those behaviors that can come from my insecurity. And I'm not going to say that's not going to happen ever again. I don't know, right? I might get that scared again. But what I'm grateful for is the increased capacity I have to be with myself by waking up more to what is true inside of me, that then allows me to let go of those restrictions on myself and have the freedom to be human and to understand that my humanity, my human experience cannot ever take away the truth of who I am. And rather than in that space of self-love and self-acceptance, that experience of that sort of becoming this more awful person, because now I'm accepting my anger and I'm accepting all of these parts of myself, like actually that happens a whole lot less, right? That shows up a whole lot less in my life. And then instead, when I have room for all of who I am, there's the greater capacity to be in life in a more peaceful, kind, loving way.